Here comes a new challenger for the 1990 RPG Showdown. Now, I was only counting established RPG franchises for this. There's enough of those releasing games on the Famicom in the first few months of 1990. But the magazine advertisements for Madara say, hold off on getting Dragon Quest. So, shots fired. They also called Madara Konami's first true RPG. So please ignore the fact that they released a different RPG just 3 months beforehand. Madara started out as a comic, and it's about a young man in a fantasy setting who was found chopped up as an infant, and the person who found him rebuilt his body with mechanical parts. He's locked into a cycle of reincarnation in combat with his evil counterpart, and so he's being hunted by demons. The game stays relatively faithful to the comic. As it opens, the man who raised Madara has been injured by a demon and can't be awakened. So Madara sets out with 2 friends to go get the medical herb that could wake him up. One thing that you're going to quickly notice here is that this is one of the few games to use Konami's VRC6 chip. It greatly expands the audio capabilities of the Famicom, and so Madara is often regarded as having one of the best Famicom soundtracks. Personally, I wasn't really that impressed by it, but part of that may be that I couldn't hear very much of it. As you walk around town, hitting the B button interacts with things, while hitting the A button brings up a menu. And yes, that is the other way around from other RPGs. In the menu, you can cast spells, use items, or check your stats. Well, I assume you can cast spells and use items, because that's what those menu options mean, but I was totally unable to do those things outside of combat. The menu also lets you configure your combat system. You can set up your party formation, the default command for every character, and how quickly you want the combat to play out. The combat in this game is really slow, so I'd recommend cranking that up to the max. To save the game, you have to go to these special trees. There's one at your house at the start of the game. Another convenient thing about the starting town is that the inn there is free, so you can just refill your health whenever you like. Alright, you've left town, time to start fighting some monsters. When you encounter an enemy, you first get a brief look at what you're going to fight, and then it goes into real-time combat. You don't have direct control over any characters. What you can do is, when you have a special command you want to give them, you can hit the A button, and after the next full round of combat has completed, an orders menu will come up. And the combat doesn't resume until you hit the B button, so you can give orders to everybody like this. The commands are fight, defend, don't do anything, run away, then 3 different kinds of spell casting, and finally items. Early on, you're only going to have access to the heal spell. It costs 100 magic points, your healer starts with 250 magic points, but that's still a pretty expensive spell. For the 4 general commands, fight, defend, stop, and run away, characters will keep doing that until you order them otherwise, including into later combats. Combat consists of watching your characters dance around to close in on the enemy, and then stand there and hit them for a while. Their pathing is terrible, and you'll often see characters go for an out-of-the-way enemy that will die before they get there, rather than go after a slightly closer enemy that's going to start attacking someone else soon. And the damage in combat is very swingy. The stronger enemies in the game could do between 10 and 100 points of damage. If your party gets wiped out, you wake up back in town, but if one character gets killed, you haul their body around with you until you can get to a doctor to revive them. If you win the fight, then you get a little bit of golden experience, and it takes a long time to level up in this game. It takes so long to reach level 2 that I was starting to think that there was some separate leveling mechanic that I wasn't familiar with, and was preparing to just go on with the game. And the combats come at you non-stop. It's rare that you can take more than 4 or 5 steps before you wind up in another fight. I played for just over an hour, and I walked to the spring where the special herb was, had to go to a fortress to release the herb, fought the boss there, went back and got the herb, and then got back to town. Now that might sound like an awful lot, but it's really about 3 screens of travel, plus another 3 for the spring and 2 more for the fortress. This was a tiny little portion of the game that I managed to cover, but it still took forever between the constant attacks and grinding up cash and experience. I decided I had enough to sit out for the spring, a bit after the half-hour mark, and then the rest of my playtime was that one expedition. It just takes forever to do anything in this game. I guess the way that you can see the seasons change as you walk around reflects that, though it does make me wonder, why is everything taking so long? Madara actually got a sequel on the Super Famicom, and that one's more of a standard RPG. The opinions I saw from Japanese Famicom fans was that it was neat how Madara followed the comic storyline, but actually playing the game was a chore. And while I don't have really strong opinions on the first part, I've only read a small portion of the comic, I can't really disagree with the second half. Kudos to Konami for trying to reinvent RPG combat. It's just that what they invented instead is kind of the worst of all worlds option. You have the lack of significant decision-making, which a lot of RPGs share, but then it plays it out in a way that extends the combat and just makes you annoyed that your team members never do the right thing. At least when I'm picking commands from a menu every round, I know that they'll do what I say. All in all, it made Madara a big disappointment, and definitely not the Dragon Quest killer that Konami was hoping for.